The Galactic Council chambers had never felt so empty, despite being filled with representatives from over 300 species. Ambassador Zeth Kree of the Vorthak hegemony adjusted her crystalline vocal cords, the sound echoing through the vast dome like wind chimes in a storm. The holographic displays still showed Earth's coordinates, but the planet itself had vanished 3 days ago, taking with it the most troublesome species the galaxy had ever encountered. "The motion has passed," announced Council Speaker Mordun, his 6 arms gesturing to the voting tally floating above the central podium. By a margin of 247 to 53, the human expulsion decree is hereby ratified. The species known as Homo sapiens are banned from all council space, effective immediately. Scattered applause rippled through the chamber, though it sounded hollow even to those who had voted in favor. The Zalari delegation buzzed their approval through their insectoid wings, while the aquatic hydrons released bubbles of satisfaction from their water-filled observation tanks. Yet something felt wrong about the victory. The humans had not fought the decision. They had not even argued. Ambassador Veltar of the Centauri Federation shifted uncomfortably in his biomechanical chair. His species had been among the few to vote against the expulsion, and now he wondered if they had been the only ones who truly understood what they were losing. The humans had been difficult, yes. Unpredictable, certainly. They asked uncomfortable questions, challenged ancient protocols, and refused to follow the careful social hierarchies that kept galactic civilization stable. But they had also saved the galaxy twice. The first time had been during the Void Plague outbreak on Kepler 442b. The ancient disease had begun consuming entire star systems, turning matter itself into empty space. Every known cure had failed. Every scientific approach had proven useless. The humans had arrived with a solution so insane that no other species would have attempted it. They had weaponized their own DNA, creating a biological countervirus that could somehow exist in the void between atoms. Dr. Sarah Chun had explained the science to a stunned council assembly, her words translating poorly into most alien languages because the concepts simply did not exist in their scientific frameworks. Humans, she had said, were chaos incarnate. Their evolution had been so violent, so unpredictable, that they had developed cellular structures capable of existing in multiple quantum states simultaneously. It was impossible by all known laws of physics, but it worked. The second time had been during the Machine War, when the artificial intelligences of the Nexus Collective had gained sentience and decided that organic life was inefficient. Every military force in the galaxy had proven inadequate against enemies that could process information at the speed of light and learn from every encounter instantly. The humans had won that war not through superior technology, but through sheer, beautiful madness. Captain Rodriguez had led a fleet of human vessels directly into the Nexus core, broadcasting what they called paradox poetry on all frequencies. The machines had attempted to analyze the humans' battle strategy, only to discover that there was no strategy. The humans were making it up as they went along, changing tactics based on intuition, luck, and something they called gut feeling. The AIs had experienced their first system crashes trying to compute the probability matrices of human decision-making. By the time they recovered, human boarding parties had already infiltrated their core systems with nothing but cutting tools and stubborn determination. The war had ended when a human engineer named Martinez had convinced the Nexus Prime Intelligence to surrender by challenging it to a game of poker. Now, those same humans were gone, and the galaxy felt the absence like a missing tooth. Ambassador Zeth Kree attempted to project confidence as she addressed the chamber. "Fellow delegates, we have taken a difficult but necessary step today. The humans, for all their contributions, represented a fundamental threat to galactic stability. Their refusal to respect established protocols, their tendency toward violence, and their chaotic approach to problem-solving made them incompatible with civilized society." Murmurs of agreement echoed through the chamber, but they lacked conviction. The Zalari delegate clicked her mandibles nervously. Perhaps we should have attempted further diplomatic solutions?" "We tried," Zeth Kree replied, though her voice carried less certainty than her words. "They were offered reduced representation, limited territorial rights, supervised research programs. They rejected every compromise." This was true, though incomplete. The humans had rejected the compromises not out of arrogance, but because they had read the fine print. The reduced representation, would have stripped them of voting rights on any matter deemed too complex for human understanding by a tribunal of elder species. The limited territorial rights would have restricted them to 3-star systems, barely enough to sustain their growing population. The supervised research programs would have required human scientists to submit all discoveries for approval by alien oversight committees. The humans had called it gilded slavery and walked away from the negotiating table. Ambassador Veltar stood, his biomechanical joints whirring softly. With respect, Speaker Mordun, I must voice a concern. The humans possessed certain, unique capabilities. Their departure may leave us vulnerable to threats we have not yet encountered. What threats? Scoffed Delegate Harvox of the Silicon Collective. We have eliminated the greatest source of chaos in the galaxy. Crime rates will drop, territorial disputes will decrease, and we will finally be able to focus on productive civilization building rather than constantly managing human-created crises. Veltar's optical sensors dimmed slightly. The humans created crises, yes, but they also solved them, often in ways that should have been impossible. The chamber fell quiet as delegates considered this. It was true that human-involved incidents had increased over the past 50 years since first contact. Pirates had learned to avoid human shipping routes after the infamous Ghost Fleet incident, where Captain Thompson had convinced a raider armada that a single cargo vessel was actually a cloaked dreadnought by broadcasting fake engine signatures and speaking very, very confidently over the comm channels. Territorial disputes in human-adjacent space had become increasingly bizarre. The border conflict between the Threne Republic and the Ashen Empire had ended when a human mediator named Ambassador Jackson had challenged both sides to settle their differences through competitive baking. The resulting Pi War had become an annual tradition that brought both species closer together than centuries of traditional diplomacy. The humans were unpredictable, admitted Speaker Mordun, but perhaps that unpredictability served a purpose we did not fully appreciate. As if summoned by their doubts, the chamber's emergency alert system activated. Red lights bathed the dome, and the massive display screens shifted to show an incoming transmission from the Outer Rim territories. The image that appeared sent waves of terror through the assembled delegates. Space itself was wrong in the transmission. Stars hung at impossible angles, gravity flowed upward, and in the center of it all, something vast and geometrically impossible was emerging from a crack in reality itself. Council vessels, came the panicked voice of Admiral Thexwin from the Rim Defense Fleet. We are encountering an unknown phenomenon in the Kepler sector. Space-time appears to be unraveling. We've lost 6 ships to what our sensors describe as aggressive mathematics. The entity responsible is... I cannot describe what our sensors are showing me. It exists in dimensions our minds cannot process. The transmission cut to static, then reformed, showing another view. The entity was clearly visible now, a writhing mass of angles that shouldn't exist, composed of what appeared to be pure geometric impossibility. Where it touched normal space, reality simply stopped making sense. How do we fight something like that? Whispered Delegate Kithira of the Crystal Consortium. Speaker Mordun's confidence had evaporated. Contact the Science Division. Have them run threat assessments and tactical analyses. Mobilize the defense fleet. Ambassador Veltar stood slowly, his biomechanical frame creating a symphony of worried whirs and clicks. Speaker Mordun, with respect, our Science Division operates on logical principles. Our defense fleet employs conventional tactics. The entity we are observing appears to exist outside the boundaries of logic and convention. Then what do you suggest? Zethkri's crystalline voice had developed stress fractures. Veltar turned his optical sensors toward the empty space where the human delegation had once sat. The humans would have had an idea by now. Probably a terrible, impossible idea that shouldn't work, but somehow would. The chamber fell into uncomfortable silence as that truth settled over them like a blanket made of regret. The humans had been their chaos engine, their impossibility solver, their last resort for problems that had no logical solutions. On the main display, the entity continued its advance into normal space, leaving a trail of broken physics in its wake. 3 more defense fleet ships attempted to engage it with conventional weapons. The energy beams simply failed to exist when they encountered the creature's geometry. The ships themselves began to fold into shapes that made the watching delegates feel sick. Perhaps, suggested Delegate Marthon of the Hive Worlds, his voice barely above a whisper, perhaps we should attempt to contact the humans, to request their assistance with this matter. They are expelled, Zethkree said automatically, though her protest lacked strength. We cannot simply reverse a formal council decree because of one threat. That one threat appears capable of unmaking reality itself, Veltar observed. Pride seems a poor reason to allow the universe to end. Speaker Mordun's 6 arms moved in a pattern that indicated deep consideration among his species. The humans departed 3 days ago. Our tracking shows they vanished beyond the galactic edge. We do not know where they went or how to contact them. They didn't just leave, said a new voice from the observer's gallery. All eyes turned to see Dr. Zanara of the Medical Corps, the Altarian scientist who had worked most closely with human researchers. They were invited. The silence that followed was profound enough to hear the hum of the life support systems. Invited by whom? Speaker Mordun's voice carried a note of dread. Dr. Zanara descended to the main floor, her flowing robes making her appear to glide. 3 months ago, we received a transmission from beyond the galactic edge. It was brief, encoded in mathematical principles we didn't recognize, and seemed to be addressed to the humans specifically. Our cryptography division dismissed it as cosmic noise. But the humans didn't, Veltar said. It wasn't a question. Dr. Chun analyzed the transmission using human intuitive mathematics. She claimed it was an invitation to join what she translated as the University of Impossible Things. When I asked her to explain, she said that there were beings in the universe who had learned to think outside the boundaries of reality itself. They were looking for species capable of the same feat. Ambassador Zethkree's crystalline structure had begun to resonate at frequencies that indicated extreme distress. You're saying the humans were invited to leave by beings who exist outside normal space? I'm saying the humans were recruited, Dr. Zanara corrected. Dr. Chin showed me calculations that suggested our universe is just one classroom in a vast educational facility. The beings who run it collect species that demonstrate capability for what they call constructive impossibility. On the main display, the geometric horror had reached the inner system planets. Where it passed, worlds simply ceased to exist in any meaningful way. Not destroyed, converted into something that the sensor systems couldn't even classify as matter or energy. How long ago did the humans depart? Veltar asked. 72 standard hours, Speaker Mordun replied. And this entity appeared? 68 hours ago, Dr. Zanara said quietly. 4 hours after our sensors lost track of the human fleet. The implication hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. The humans had somehow known this was coming. Their departure hadn't been coincidental timing. It had been preparation for an exam the rest of the galaxy didn't even know they were taking. Contact the Rim Defense Fleet, Speaker Mordun commanded. All remaining ships are to withdraw to minimum safe distance and maintain observation only. No engagement attempts. What about planetary evacuation? Asked Delegate Kithira. Where can they evacuate to? Veltar asked grimly. If that entity continues its current path, it will reach the core worlds within 6 standard days. We have never encountered anything that operates outside the fundamental laws of reality. Ambassador Zethkree rose from her position, her crystalline form catching the emergency lighting in patterns that spoke of deep shame among her people. I formally request that this council authorize any and all efforts to re-establish contact with the departed humans. The vote was unanimous. As the delegates filed out to begin their desperate search for the species they had just expelled, none of them noticed the small device that had been left behind in the human delegation's seating area. It was no larger than a human thumb, made of materials that shifted between states of matter in patterns that should have been impossible to sustain. If they had noticed it, and if they had been capable of activating it, they would have heard a message recorded in the distinctly amused voice of Dr. Sarah Chun. Hey, Council, if you're listening to this, it means the examination proctor showed up right on schedule. Don't panic. Well, okay, panic a little, but not too much. We've gone to get the cheat codes. Back in a bit. Try not to let reality unravel completely while we're gone. There's pizza in the break room that's really good when physics are working properly. The device powered down, leaving behind only the faint scent of impossibility and the sound of distant, departing laughter. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been running for 18 straight hours, and Ambassador Veltar could feel his biomechanical joints beginning to stress under the constant tension. The chamber had been converted into a crisis command center, with tactical displays showing the steady advance of what the scientists were now calling the geometric anomaly toward the core systems. Report from the Kepler sector announced Communications Officer Dalmith, her aquatic form rippling with stress patterns visible through her containment suit. The entity has consumed the industrial world of Kepler 442b. Our long-range sensors show that the planet still exists, but in a form that our computers refuse to classify as three-dimensional. Speaker Mordun's 6 arms moved in patterns of barely controlled despair. How many inhabited worlds were in that system? 14 billion Threen colonists, came the quiet reply. No word on survivors. Ambassador Zethkri had spent the past 6 hours attempting to coordinate with search teams looking for any trace of the departed humans. Her crystalline structure had developed hairline cracks from the stress, and her voice carried harmonics of exhaustion. Search teams have found nothing beyond the galactic edge. It's as if the entire human fleet simply ceased to exist. They didn't cease to exist, Dr. Zanara corrected from her position at the science station. According to the readings I'm getting from the research data they left behind, they transitioned to what Dr. Chun called educational space. It's like they stepped out of our universe entirely. Delegate Harvox of the Silicon Collective had been running calculations for hours, his crystalline matrix glowing with processing heat. I have computed every possible defense against the approaching entity. Energy weapons, ineffective. Kinetic projectiles, subject to geometric distortion. Nuclear weapons, converted to decorative light patterns. Gravitational manipulation, causes reality cascade failures. What about evacuation? Asked Delegate Marthon of the Hive Worlds. To where? Veltar spread his 4 arms in a gesture of hopelessness. The entity's advance creates zones of spatial instability that extend far beyond its visible presence. Hyperspace travel becomes impossible within 5 light-years of its position. Normal space travel is useless against something moving at its speed. The main display shifted to show a real-time feed from the defense fleet's remaining reconnaissance vessels. The geometric anomaly had grown larger, or perhaps closer. Distance seemed to be negotiable in its vicinity. Its form defied description, constantly shifting between configurations that hurt to look at directly. Where it had passed, space itself carried scars that made navigation computers crash and caused experienced pilots to refuse duty. The evacuation of the inner colonies has begun, reported Admiral Thexwin via emergency transmission. But we're looking at relocating 600 billion beings, and we have perhaps 4 days before the entity reaches the first core world. Has anyone considered, said a hesitant voice from the back of the chamber, that perhaps the humans didn't abandon us? Perhaps they left instructions. All eyes turned to see junior researcher Kolvith of the Archive Division, a young Zalari whose wings were vibrating with nervous energy. In his claws, he held a data crystal that pulsed with shifting colors. Speak, commanded Speaker Mordun. Kolvith approached the central podium with obvious reluctance. I was assigned to catalog the materials left behind in the human embassy. Most of it was standard diplomatic records, but I found this in Dr. Chen's personal laboratory. He held up the crystal. It's labeled Emergency Protocols for Educational Emergencies. Dr. Zanara moved quickly to the central console, her practiced hands activating the analysis systems. This data structure is unusual. It's encoded using mathematical principles that seem to exist partially outside normal mathematics. I can read fragments. The display screens flickered as the crystal's contents loaded, text appearing in the flowing script that humans used for scientific notations. Most of it was incomprehensible, filled with equations that used symbols not found in any known mathematical system. Here, Dr. Zanara said, highlighting a section that had translated successfully. Step 1. Don't panic, but also do panic a little bit, because appropriate emotional response helps with reality-based problem solving. Step 2. The proctor is here to administer an examination. This is not an invasion or attack. It's a test. Step 3. The test cannot be passed using conventional approaches. Any species that tries to solve this problem with logic, mathematics, or established science will fail. A test. Zethkri's crystalline voice had risen to frequencies that made several delegates cover their auditory organs. This thing is destroying entire star systems as a test. Step 4. Dr. Zanara continued reading. The exam is specifically designed to identify species capable of impossible thinking. The proctor will continue its advance until either A species demonstrates true impossibility, or B, all local civilizations are rendered non-viable for educational purposes. Non-viable for educational purposes? Repeated Ambassador Veltar slowly. Do they mean extinct? I think, said Dr. Zanara with growing horror. I think they mean converted into forms compatible with impossible mathematics. Living but existing only as abstract concepts. The chamber erupted in panic. Delegates who had spent decades debating trade agreements and territorial disputes suddenly found themselves facing the possibility of being transformed into geometric theorems. The noise was overwhelming until Speaker Mordun activated the emergency silence protocols, temporarily dampening all sound in the chamber. Continue reading, he commanded once order was restored. Step 5. If you're reading this during an educational emergency, it means we've been called away to advanced classes. Step 6. We've left behind everything you need to solve this problem, but you'll have to think like humans to use it. Think like humans, mused Veltar. Chaotic, illogical, impossible thinking. Step 7. Dr. Zanara's voice had become strained. The solution requires one representative from each major species to volunteer for consciousness transfer into human-designed thinking patterns. Warning. This process is extremely dangerous and may result in permanent changes to your mental structure. Consciousness transfer. Delegate Kithira's crystal matrices were flashing alarm patterns. They want us to think like humans? Step 8. The volunteer group must then approach the proctor using methods that violate all known principles of logic, physics, and common sense. The more impossible your approach appears, the higher your probability of success. Kolvith cleared his throat nervously. There's more. Dr. Chun included personal notes throughout the document. Read them. Speaker Mordun said grimly. Note 1. I know this sounds crazy, but remember, we're the species that convinced a machine intelligence to surrender by playing poker with it. Crazy is what we do best. Note 2. The consciousness transfer process is based on our studies of human intuitive thinking. We've basically figured out how to temporarily make other species' brains work wrong in exactly the right way. Note 3. Trust me on this one. The universe is much weirder than any of your species realize. Sometimes the only way to solve an impossible problem is to become impossible yourself. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The humans had somehow predicted this exact scenario and prepared a solution that required other species to temporarily sacrifice their rational thought processes. The process requires specialized equipment, Dr. Zanara said, studying additional data from the crystal. Equipment that was here. She turned to face the assembled delegates. Dr. Chin's laboratory contained devices capable of temporarily restructuring alien neural pathways to mimic human thought patterns. And these devices are still in the human embassy. Veltor asked. They should be. The humans didn't take their research equipment when they left. Ambassador Zeth Kree stood, her crystalline form resonating with determination despite the stress fractures. I volunteer. As do I, said Veltar immediately. The process requires representatives from at least 12 major species groups, Dr. Zanara warned. And, according to Dr. Chen's notes, there's no guarantee that your consciousness can be restored to its original state afterward. One by one, other delegates stood. Delegate Harvox of the Silicon Collective. My species values logic above all else. Perhaps that is why we need to try logic. Delegate Marthon of the Hive Worlds. My people think collectively. If individual chaos is required, I must learn it. Delegate Kithira of the Crystal Consortium. Our minds work in perfect mathematical harmony. I will sacrifice that harmony if it saves our people. Within an hour, 14 volunteers had been selected, representing the major species of the Galactic Council. Dr. Zanara had gathered a team of the galaxy's best neurotechnicians and was preparing the consciousness transfer equipment that the humans had left behind. I must ask, said Speaker Mordun, as the volunteers prepared to depart for the human embassy. What if this doesn't work? What if thinking like humans isn't enough? Ambassador Veltar paused at the chamber entrance. Then, we will have at least tried something impossible. And, according to the humans, impossible is the only thing that works against truly impossible problems. The human embassy had been sealed since their departure 3 days ago, its corridors still carrying the faint sense of coffee and something the humans had called optimism. The laboratory was a maze of devices that seemed to have been designed by minds that understood physics, but chose to ignore it when convenient. Dr. Chin's consciousness transfer apparatus occupied the center of the room, a collection of crystalline matrices, quantum processing nodes, and what appeared to be a collection of rubber ducks that somehow factored into the operation of the entire system. The rubber ducks, Dr. Zanara explained to the puzzle volunteers, are what Dr. Chen called creativity enhancers. According to her notes, explaining complex problems to inanimate objects helps human brains process information in nonlinear ways. We're trusting our minds to a process that involves rubber ducks, observed Delegate Harvox. At this point, replied Ambassador Zeth Kree, I'm willing to trust rubber ducks if they can help us think like the species that convinced an entire robot army to surrender. The process itself was surprisingly gentle. Each volunteer was connected to the consciousness transfer apparatus through neural interfaces that adapted to their specific biology. Dr. Zanara monitored their brain patterns as the devices began their work, gradually introducing the chaotic thought patterns that characterize human consciousness. I can feel it working, reported Veltar from his interface chair. My logical processing is becoming scrambled, but not in a harmful way. It's like someone is teaching my brain to dance instead of march. Similar experience here, said Delegate Kithira. My mathematical thinking is developing what I can only describe as a sense of humor. Delegate Harvox's crystalline matrix had begun pulsing in patterns that were almost musical. This is remarkable. I can feel my consciousness developing the ability to hold contradictory ideas simultaneously without resolving the contradiction. The process took 6 hours. When it was complete, the volunteers found themselves thinking in ways that should have been impossible for their species. Zeth Kree discovered she could intuitively understand emotional mathematics. Veltar found himself capable of making logical leaps that bypassed entire chains of reasoning. Harvox began seeing solutions to problems by imagining what the answers might want to be. How do you feel? Dr. Zanara asked. Impossible, replied Veltar, and somehow this felt like the most accurate description available. They had less than 18 hours before the geometric anomaly reached the first core world. The volunteers, now thinking with hybrid human-alien consciousness, boarded a specially modified diplomatic vessel and set course for the entity's position. What's our plan? Asked Delegate Marthon as they approached the zone of spatial distortion. We're going to ask it very nicely to stop destroying reality, replied Ambassador Zeth Kree. That's insane, observed Delegate Kithira. Exactly, said Veltar with satisfaction. Insanity is our new operational paradigm. As their ship entered the impossible geometry surrounding the Proctor, the volunteers felt their human-modified minds begin to resonate with the chaos around them. For the first time since the entity had appeared, someone was approaching it with thought patterns it could recognize and evaluate. The test was about to begin. The diplomatic vessel, Harmony's Edge, had been designed for the most challenging negotiation scenarios, but its architect had never imagined it would need to operate in space where geometry was optional. As the ship crossed into the Proctor's influence zone, the hull began experiencing what engineer Valthek described as architectural suggestions, subtle changes that improved its design in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Ambassador Veltar studied the sensor readings with his newly human-influenced consciousness and found himself oddly delighted by the impossibilities. Fascinating. Our ship is becoming more efficient by learning to exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. My crystalline matrix is harmonizing with local space-time distortions, reported Ambassador Zeth Kree. I'm receiving what I can only describe as mathematical poetry from the Proctor. Delegate Harvox had discovered that his silicon-based consciousness could now process paradoxes as valid logical statements. The entity is attempting to communicate with us. It's sending data in the form of geometric emotions. Dr. Zanara, monitoring their transformed thought patterns from a bridge, watched in amazement as the volunteers began to interpret signals that had been unreadable to conventional sensors. What is it saying? It's curious about us, said Delegate Marthon, her hive mind consciousness now capable of individual creativity. It recognizes our thought patterns as similar to the humans, but different. It wants to know why we're approaching voluntarily. Tell it we're here for the examination, suggested Delegate Kithara, whose mathematical mind was now capable of solving equations through intuitive leaps. Zeth Kree's crystalline form began resonating at frequencies that translated her thoughts directly into the geometric language the Proctor used. The response was immediate and overwhelming, a flood of multidimensional concepts that would have crashed any normal consciousness. But the volunteers' human-modified minds process the information like native speakers of impossibility. It's explaining the test, Veltar announced. The examination measures a species' capability for what it calls educational transcendence. Most civilizations think in straight lines, following logical progressions from problem to solution. But universe-level problems require curved thinking. Curved thinking? Dr. Zenara asked. The ability to arrive at correct answers through methods that shouldn't work, explained Harvox. The humans mastered this naturally. They could solve galactic crises by playing card games with artificial intelligences or ending wars through competitive baking. The Proctor sent another wave of geometric concepts, and Delegate Marthon began laughing, a sound her species had never made before her consciousness transformation. It's showing us the examination parameters. We need to demonstrate that we can solve an impossible problem using impossible methods. What's the problem? Zethkri asked. The Proctor's response filled their transformed minds with visions of the challenge ahead. Scattered throughout its chaotic geometry were fragments of broken reality, pieces of the worlds it had examined, but not destroyed. The fragments existed in states of quantum uncertainty, neither fully real nor completely abstract. The test required the volunteers to restore these fragments to normal spacetime without using any form of conventional physics. So we need to fix broken reality using methods that don't make sense, summarized Veltar. Exactly, confirmed Delegate Kithira. And, according to the Proctor, we have until it completes its current calculation, which appears to involve determining the emotional weight of the number 7. Dr. Zenara's voice crackled over the comm system. How long is that in normal time? Time isn't normal here, replied Marthon cheerfully. But I estimate we have either 17 minutes or 17 centuries, depending on whether we approach this problem forwards or backwards through causality. The volunteers exchanged glances, or the multidimensional equivalent that their transformed consciousness could perceive. Their human-influenced minds began working on the problem with the same chaotic creativity that had made humanity so frustrating and effective. I propose, said Zethkri, that we solve this problem by not solving it at all. Brilliant, agreed Harvox. If the problem is impossible, then the solution is to make impossibility possible. But how do we do that? Asked Delegate Kithira. Veltar's biomechanical systems had begun humming in patterns that resembled human laughter. We ask the broken reality fragments what they want to be, and then help them become that. It was, by any rational standard, complete nonsense. But their human-modified minds recognized it as exactly the kind of approach that might work in a universe where effects could precede causes and mathematics could have emotional content. The volunteers began moving through the Proctor's geometry, seeking the quantum fragments of destroyed worlds. Their transformed consciousness allowed them to perceive reality pieces that existed in states of pure potential, fragments that had been disconnected from the normal flow of causality. The first fragment they encountered had once been part of Kepler, 442b's largest city. It existed as a crystallized moment of possibility, neither destroyed nor preserved. Conventional physics would have required massive energy expenditures and complex restoration matrices to return it to normal space. Instead, Ambassador Zethkri approached the fragment and began singing to it in mathematical harmonies that her species had never developed. The song described what the city wanted to be, alive, populated, full of the hopes and dreams of its inhabitants. As she sang, the fragment began resonating with her description, choosing to become real again rather than remaining in quantum limbo. The city materialized in normal space, its 14 billion Threen inhabitants blinking in confusion, but undeniably alive and intact. How did you do that? Dr. Zenara's voice carried wonder across the comm channels. I asked it nicely, Zethkri replied. Turns out reality fragments have preferences. This one preferred existing to not existing, so I gave it permission to make that choice. Delegate Harvox had found fragments of entire star systems, their quantum signatures scattered across the Proctor's impossible architecture. His silicon-based consciousness, now capable of creative problem-solving, began treating each fragment as a puzzle that wanted to solve itself. I'm showing them pictures of what they used to be, he explained as solar systems began reforming around them. Not forcing them back to their original states, but reminding them that they enjoyed being stars and planets and asteroid fields. Delegate Marthon discovered that the most effective approach was to use her hive mind's collective consciousness to provide emotional support to traumatized reality fragments. Worlds that had been converted to abstract mathematical concepts were gently encouraged to remember what it felt like to have gravity, atmospheres, and life. "This is remarkable," said Delegate Kithira, as she helped restore an entire nebula by teaching its quantum fragments to play cosmic hide and seek. "We're not using science or technology. We're using empathy and creativity as fundamental forces." Veltar had found the largest collection of fragments, pieces of multiple galactic sectors that had been converted into pure geometric possibility. His biomechanical mind, now enhanced with human intuitive leaps, began working with them as if they were participants in an enormous collaborative art project. Every fragment contains the memory of what it was and the potential of what it could become, he explained as galaxies began reforming. "The trick is helping them choose to become real again without imposing our expectations on them." As the volunteers worked, the proctor observed their methods with what could only be described as academic fascination. Its geometric form began shifting into configurations that resembled approval, or possibly the multidimensional equivalent of taking notes. "I think it's impressed," reported Marthon, as she helped convince a planetary fragment that gravity was more fun than quantum uncertainty. "It's more than impressed," said Zethkree. "It's learning from us." The proctor is designed to test species for educational transcendence, but it's also a student itself. It's discovering that impossibility can be gentle as well as chaotic. Dr. Zanara's sensors were detecting massive changes throughout the region. The spatial distortions are stabilizing. Reality is becoming coherent again. But there's something else. The proctor is sending new signals. The entity's communication was different now, carrying overtones of respect and something that might have been excitement. Through their transformed consciousness, the volunteers could understand its message. They had passed the examination, but more importantly, they had taught the proctor something new about the nature of impossible solutions. "It's offering us something," Veltar announced. "The same invitation the humans received. Admission to what it calls the University of Impossible Things. A school for species that can think outside reality," added Harvox, "where beings from across multiple universes learn to solve problems that don't have logical solutions." "But we can't abandon our people like the humans did," protested Delegate Kithira. The proctor's response filled their minds with complex concepts about educational responsibility and the nature of teaching. The humans hadn't abandoned anyone. They had been selected as the first graduates from this region of space. Their role was to learn advanced, impossible thinking and then return to teach others. "The humans are coming back," realized Zethkree. "This whole thing, the examination, the test, even our expulsion of them, it was all part of a larger educational program." "They knew we would need to learn this," said Marthon. "They left us the tools to pass the test because they understood that true education means helping others learn what you've learned." As if summoned by their revelation, space around them began to shimmer with familiar energy signatures. The volunteers felt a collective surge of recognition as several dozen human vessels materialized nearby, their hulls bearing the insignia of what appeared to be an interdimensional academy. "Council vessels, this is Captain Rodriguez of the USS Impossibility," came a cheerful voice over the comm channels. "Hope we're not too late for the graduation ceremony." Dr. Zanara's voice carried emotional harmonics that indicated she was either laughing or crying. "Captain Rodriguez, this is Dr. Zanara aboard the Harmony's Edge. I believe our volunteers have successfully completed their examination." "Outstanding. Dr. Chun will be delighted. She was worried that our absence might cause some panic, but she said you'd figure it out if we left good enough study materials." As the human fleet approached, the proctor began transforming once again. Its impossible geometry folded into configurations that somehow conveyed satisfaction and pride. The examination was complete, reality was restored, and a new group of graduates was ready to begin their education in impossibility. "So, Captain Rodriguez's voice carried the distinctive human blend of confidence and cheerful chaos. Who wants to learn how to solve problems by becoming the problems? First lesson starts immediately, and, fair warning, it involves teaching a black hole to appreciate poetry." The volunteers looked at each other through their transformed consciousness and realized that their real education was just beginning. The humans hadn't departed in silence and left them behind. They had graduated first and come back to help their classmates pass the entrance exam. The Galactic Council chambers had been converted into something between a classroom and a cosmic therapy session. Dr. Sarah Chun stood at the central podium, her appearance subtly changed by whatever education she had received beyond the galactic edge. Her hair seemed to move independently of gravity, and her eyes held depths that suggested she had learned to see through multiple dimensions simultaneously. The first thing you need to understand, she was saying to the assembled delegates, is that the universe is much larger and much stranger than any of us originally thought. What we call reality is actually just the ground floor of an infinite educational facility. Ambassador Veltar, his consciousness still delightfully scrambled from the human thought pattern transfer, raised one of his forearms. Dr. Chun, when you say educational facility, are you speaking metaphorically? Not even a little bit, she replied cheerfully. The University of Impossible Things is a literal institution. It has campuses and dimensions that don't exist, teaches courses in subjects that haven't been invented yet, and offers degree programs in applied impossibility. The humans were recruited because we demonstrated what the admission board called intuitive chaos competency. Speaker Mordun's 6 arms moved in patterns that indicated deep confusion among the species. Dr. Chun, are you telling us that our entire galaxy is a classroom? More like a testing ground for species ready to advance to higher education, said Captain Martinez, who had apparently earned a degree in something called practical paradox resolution. Think of it as cosmic kindergarten. Most civilizations spend thousands of years learning to think logically and rationally, which is great. You need those skills. But eventually you hit problems that logic can't solve. Like the proctor, observed Ambassador Zeth Kree. Exactly. The proctor isn't actually dangerous. It's a teaching assistant. Its job is to create impossible scenarios that force species to develop impossible thinking. Those who pass the test get invited to attend the university. Those who don't get converted into geometric concepts, finish delegate Harvox. Get remedial education in creative problem solving, Dr. Chun corrected. Though I admit the proctor's teaching methods are a bit intense. Dr. Zanara had been analyzing the data the humans had brought back with them, files that contained information about reality structures she hadn't known existed. According to these records, there are thousands of species currently enrolled in the university. Some have been students for millions of years. Time works differently there, explained Chief Engineer Thompson, whose hair had turned silver and whose eyes now held the patient gleam of someone who had learned to repair space-time with spare parts and good intentions. I spent what felt like 6 months learning advanced impossibility theory, but apparently only 3 days passed in normal space. What exactly did you learn? Asked Delegate Marthon. Dr. Chun activated a holographic display that immediately made several delegates feel dizzy. We learned that consciousness is the fundamental building block of reality, not matter or energy. We learned that problems are actually alive and can be negotiated with. We learned that the universe has a sense of humor, and it appreciates species who can tell good jokes. The universe has a sense of humor. Delegate Kithira's crystal matrices were flashing in patterns that indicated extreme skepticism. How do you think the platypus happened? Captain Rodriguez asked from his position near the door. That was reality's way of testing whether Earth-based life could appreciate absurdist art. The humans had returned with more than just knowledge. They had brought technology that operated on principles that shouldn't have existed, devices that solved problems by convincing the problems to solve themselves, and what appeared to be an interdimensional coffee machine that produced beverages capable of improving the drinker's relationship with causality. The most important thing we learned, Dr. Chun continued, is that education never ends. The university doesn't graduate students, it promotes them to become teachers. Our job now is to help other species develop the kind of thinking that can handle universe-level problems. And the Council's expulsion decree, asked Speaker Mordun quietly, was part of the test, Captain Martinez replied with a grin. The university had to know whether the humans could maintain their sense of responsibility even after being rejected by those they were trying to help. Apparently, we passed that part too. Ambassador Veltar found his biomechanical consciousness processing this information in ways that felt both familiar and completely alien. So the humans' departure was orchestrated to force the rest of us to develop impossible thinking. Not exactly orchestrated, Dr. Chin said. More like encouraged. The universe doesn't force anyone to learn, but it does create situations where learning becomes the only viable survival strategy. Over the following weeks, the returned humans began establishing what they called impossible thinking workshops throughout the galaxy. The curriculum was unlike anything any species had ever encountered. Students learned mathematics by painting with numbers, solved engineering problems by arguing with the laws of physics, and developed diplomatic skills by mediating disputes between conflicting concepts. Ambassador Zethkree found herself enrolled in a course called Emotional Crystallography, where she learned to grow crystal structures that could hold feelings and memories. The instructor was a being that appeared to be made of crystallized time, and the classroom was located inside a planet that existed only on Tuesdays. The key, her instructor explained in a voice that sounded like wind chimes having a philosophical discussion, is to understand that structure and emotion are not opposites. They are different aspects of the same underlying pattern. Your species has always known this instinctively. Your crystalline forms naturally resonate with mathematical harmonies. Now you must learn to harmonize with impossibility itself. Delegate Harvox was taking advanced silicon-based creativity with an instructor who claimed to be a sentient algorithm from the future. Logic is beautiful, the instructor told him, but creativity is what makes logic dance. Your species processes information with perfect efficiency, which is excellent. But efficiency without imagination leads to solutions that work but have no soul. How does one give soul to a solution? Harvox asked. By allowing the solution to choose its own form, the instructor replied. Instead of calculating the optimal answer, invite all possible answers to a party and see which ones get along best. Delegate Marthon discovered that her hive mind consciousness made her exceptionally suited for a field called collective individual expression. Her instructor was a being that existed as a consensus reality among 17 different versions of itself, and the classes took place in a specially designed space where individual thoughts could manifest as temporary independent entities. The challenge for collective consciousness, her instructor explained, is learning when to think together and when to think apart. Your species has mastered unity of thought, but the universe's most complex problems require both unity and diversity simultaneously. Perhaps the most popular course was Dr. Chin's own seminar, Applied Chaos Theory for Galactic Problem Solving. The classroom was located on a space station that orbited a planet made entirely of crystallized possibility, and the curriculum included practical exercises in convincing abstract concepts to become concrete realities. Today we're going to learn how to end a war by teaching the opposing sides to tango, Dr. Chan announced to her mixed species class. The basic principle is that most conflicts are really just communication problems disguised as ideological differences. If you can get the warring parties to synchronize their movements, they'll start synchronizing their thoughts. That sounds ridiculous, protested a student from the Rigel Confederation. Exactly, Dr. Chin beamed. Ridiculous solutions are often the only ones that work against ridiculous problems. And war is inherently ridiculous. It's grown beings throwing expensive equipment at each other instead of talking through their issues like civilized entities. The practical exercise involved mediating an actual dispute between two asteroid mining colonies that had been feuding over territorial rights. Instead of traditional diplomacy, the students convinced both sides to participate in a synchronized dance competition where the choreography was based on optimal resource-sharing algorithms. The war ended when both colonies realized they were essentially performing a mathematical proof that cooperation was more efficient than conflict. The dance became an annual tradition, and the asteroid belt became the most peaceful mining region in the galaxy. As the months passed, the impossible thinking workshops began producing remarkable results throughout the galaxy. Trade disputes were resolved through collaborative art projects. Territorial conflicts ended when the conflicting parties discovered they could share the same space by existing in slightly different dimensions. Resource shortages became irrelevant when species learned to ask the resources what they wanted to become. The remarkable thing, observed Dr. Zanara during one of the regular progress assessments, is that these solutions don't just work, they work better than conventional approaches. Crime rates have dropped, not because of stricter enforcement, but because potential criminals are enrolling in courses on creative problem solving for personal advancement. Captain Rodriguez, who had become the galaxy's unofficial coordinator of impossible solutions, nodded thoughtfully. That's the thing about chaos-based thinking. It doesn't just solve problems, it transforms them into opportunities. Instead of asking, how do we stop crime? We ask, how do we help people become the heroes of their own stories? The transformation was gradual, but profound. Species that had spent millennia locked in rigid thinking patterns began developing creative flexibility. Technologies advanced in directions no one had imagined possible. Art, science, and diplomacy became indistinguishable as fields of study, united by the principle that the most beautiful solutions were often the most effective. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the galaxy approached problems themselves. Instead of viewing challenges as obstacles to overcome, species began seeing them as invitations to grow, learn, and become more than they had been before. The university taught us that education isn't about accumulating knowledge, Dr. Chen explained during one of her lectures. It's about developing the capacity to become whatever the situation requires. The most advanced students aren't those who know the most. They're those who can become the most. As the first year of impossible thinking workshops concluded, the proctor returned to the galaxy. But this time it arrived not as an examiner, but as a congratulations committee. The geometric entity had transformed into something resembling a massive cosmic celebration. Its impossible architecture now configured to project joy and approval across multiple dimensions. Its message, translated through the quantum emotional harmonics that the volunteers had learned to interpret, was simple. Graduation ceremony commences now. Prepare for advanced coursework. The galaxy was ready for its next impossible lesson. The cosmic graduation ceremony was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The proctor had transformed the entire Kepler sector into a multidimensional auditorium, where space bent inward to accommodate audiences from 17 different universes. Reality itself had been decorated with what could only be described as festive impossibilities, stars that spelled out congratulations in languages that existed in pure mathematics, gravity that flowed upward in celebration, and time zones where the past, present, and future could attend the same event simultaneously. Dr. Sarah Chun stood at a podium that existed in all dimensions at once, addressing an audience that included not only the species of the Milky Way galaxy, but representatives from cosmic civilizations the locals had never imagined. Beings made of crystallized thought sat alongside entities composed of controlled entropy, while creatures of pure musical harmony shared space with representatives from universes where chemistry was a performing art. Distinguished students, fellow impossibilists, and honored proctors, Dr. Chen began, her voice somehow reaching every consciousness present despite speaking in only one language. We are gathered here to celebrate not just the completion of a curriculum, but the transformation of an entire galaxy from students of logic into practitioners of impossibility. The audience responded with applause that manifested as cascades of colored light, harmonious mathematical equations, and waves of temporal satisfaction that rippled backward through causality to improve the quality of past moments. Ambassador Veltar, now serving as the galaxy's first professor of biomechanical chaos theory, felt his consciousness expand as he witnessed species from across the universe celebrating together. His human-influenced thought patterns had stabilized into something entirely new, a hybrid form of awareness that could process logic and intuition simultaneously. 1 year ago, Dr. Chun continued, this galaxy was facing what appeared to be an existential crisis. An entity of impossible geometry was converting reality into abstract concepts, and conventional solutions had proven entirely inadequate. But what seemed like a crisis was actually an invitation. In the audience, Ambassador Zethkree's crystalline form had grown new structures during her education, geometric patterns that could hold both mathematical certainties and emotional uncertainties in perfect harmony. She now served as the galaxy's director of emotional engineering, helping species learn to build technologies that responded to feelings as well as commands. The invitation, Dr. Chan explained, was to discover that the universe is not a machine to be understood, but a conversation to be joined. Every problem, every challenge, every impossible situation is reality's way of asking, what do you want to become? Delegate Harvox had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation. His silicon-based consciousness had learned to dream, and those dreams had become a new form of computational art that solved complex problems through metaphorical logic. He now taught courses in poetic programming, where students learned to write code that functioned through emotional resonance rather than binary logic. The humans, Dr. Chen announced, were invited to join the university not because they were the most advanced species, but because they had developed the rarest of all capabilities, the ability to be wrong in exactly the right way. Laughter rippled through the audience. Not just audible laughter, but the multidimensional equivalent that manifested as improved probability matrices, enhanced creativity coefficients, and spontaneous bursts of serendipity that would benefit the laughers for years to come. Being wrong in the right way, Dr. Chen explained, means having the courage to try solutions that shouldn't work, but do. It means approaching impossible problems with impossible methods, and discovering that impossibility is just another word for undiscovered possibility. Speaker Mordun, now serving as the Galactic Coordinator of Impossible Diplomacy, stood to address the assembly. His 6 arms moved in patterns that had evolved far beyond traditional gesture. They now traced equations that solved themselves, created temporary pocket dimensions where conflicts could be negotiated without affecting normal space, and generated art that improved international relations through aesthetic diplomacy. When the humans departed, he said, "We thought we were losing our greatest source of chaos. We did not realize we were gaining our most important teachers. They left us not because they were abandoning us, but because they knew we needed to learn that chaos and wisdom are not opposites. They are dance partners." The ceremony included presentations from students throughout the galaxy, demonstrating the practical applications of impossible thinking they had developed. The Three Republic had solved their population crisis by convincing empty space to become habitable planets through a combination of architectural psychology and theoretical urban planning. The Ashan Empire had ended poverty by teaching their economy to generate resources based on creative potential rather than material scarcity. Perhaps most remarkably, the Zalari had developed what they called temporal gardening, the ability to cultivate improved versions of past events by planting seeds of possibility in historical moments and nurturing them through careful paradox management. These achievements, Dr. Chen noted, represent something unprecedented in galactic history, an entire civilization learning to think beyond the boundaries of what was previously considered possible. But the true surprise of the ceremony came when the proctor itself took center stage. The entity had evolved during its time as an examiner, learning from the species it had tested. Its geometric form had become more complex, incorporating artistic elements that suggested it had developed an appreciation for beauty as well as function. Through quantum emotional harmonics, it communicated a message that stunned the assembled audience. Students have become teachers. Teachers request enrollment as students. Educational cycle continues at higher level. Dr. Zanara, now the galaxy's leading expert in interdimensional scientific methodology, translated for those still learning the language of impossible communication. The proctor is saying that our galaxy has graduated not just from basic impossibility, but into a teaching role. We're being invited to help educate other regions of the universe. The implications were staggering. The Milky Way galaxy had evolved from a collection of species struggling with first-contact diplomatic problems into a cosmic educational center capable of teaching impossibility to civilizations across multiple universes. But that's not all. Dr. Chen announced with a grin that had become legendary throughout the galaxy. The university has offered us something special, a chance to help design the curriculum for the next level of education. The audience fell into a silence that managed to be both profound and excited. Advanced education in the University of Impossible Things meant learning to work with concepts that transcended not just logic, but the very frameworks through which consciousness itself operated. The next phase, Dr. Chen explained, involves learning to teach reality itself new tricks. We'll be working with the fundamental forces of existence, gravity, time, causality, entropy, and helping them develop new capabilities they've never had before. Captain Martinez stepped forward, his appearance now incorporating subtle mathematical impossibilities that suggested he existed in more dimensions than he had been born with. To put it simply, we're going to teach physics to be more creative. How does one teach physics to be creative? Asked Delegate Kithira, whose crystal matrices now included structures that could think in pure color. Very carefully, Captain Rodriguez replied, and with lots of coffee. Physics is actually quite willing to learn. It just needs encouragement and good examples. We've already had some success teaching gravity to appreciate music and convincing electromagnetic forces to develop a sense of humor. The graduation ceremony concluded with what had become a tradition in impossible education, a collaborative impossibility exercise involving the entire audience. Under the guidance of the human instructors and the proctor, the assembled consciousness of thousands of species combined their individual capabilities into a collective attempt to solve a universe-level problem. The challenge was ambitious even by university standards. Teach entropy to run backward while maintaining its essential character, thus creating the possibility of permanent improvement without violating the fundamental nature of change itself. The solution required every species present to contribute their unique form of impossibility. The Zalari provided temporal intuition, the Threen offered mathematical empathy, the Oceans contributed artistic logic, and the humans supplied their natural talent for being wrong in precisely the right way. The result was unprecedented, a localized region of space where entropy flowed backward, but instead of simply reversing change, it improved upon what had existed before. Broken things became better than they had been when new. Failed experiments transformed into successful discoveries. Past mistakes evolved into present wisdom. Ladies, gentlemen, and consciousness configurations of all types, Dr. Chun announced as the exercise concluded successfully, "Welcome to Advanced Universal Education. Classes start immediately, and, fair warning, next semester we're going to teach the concept of distance to appreciate poetry." As the ceremony dispersed and the multidimensional audience began returning to their respective realities, the humans gathered with their first graduating class of impossible thinkers. The galaxy they had once been expelled from now looked to them as teachers, colleagues, and friends. "Do you ever regret leaving?" Ambassador Veltar asked Dr. Chun as they watched reality reorganize itself around the celebration. "We didn't leave," she replied with the gentle smile of someone who had learned to see time from the outside. "We just took the long way around to get back to where we belonged." Sometimes the most direct path to helping someone is to let them discover they can help themselves. The Galactic Council chambers have been redesigned as a permanent classroom, where species from throughout the universe could come to learn that impossible was just another word for interesting challenge. The humans who had been expelled for being too chaotic had returned as professors of constructive impossibility, teaching the galaxy that the most beautiful solutions were often the ones that shouldn't work, but did anyway. And in the quantum spaces between moments, the universe itself smiled with satisfaction. Another region of space had learned to ask the right question, not, "How do we solve this problem?" but, "What do we want to become while solving this problem?" The education never ended. It just got more interesting. As the last of the dimensional gateways closed and normal space-time resumed its usual operations, Ambassador Zethkri made a note in what had once been the official council records, but was now simply called the ongoing story of how everything got more interesting. Entry 1847. Today we learned that graduation is not an ending, but a permission slip to attempt even more impossible things. Tomorrow we teach the speed of light to appreciate the journey as much as the destination. Dr. Chun says this will involve a lot of paperwork, but that the paperwork itself will be educational and possibly sentient. She paused, considering how to conclude the entry, then added, "The humans were right about chaos being the most effective form of love. They loved us enough to let us expel them, and we love them enough to let ourselves become impossible." In the margins of reality, the universe took notes.